What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Be That 1% podcast. I'm your host, James Silvis. Welcome back to the show. If this is your first time, welcome. And if you're a return listener, welcome home. Going to be trying a little something new here today to start off the show. Let's get some music going. Learning how to use my my podcast equipment now. So today is going to be a bit different. Going to be referencing one of my go-to books in sports psychology. It's called Endure. It's written by an award-winning columnist, Alex Hutchinson, and the foreword has been written by some pretty incredible people, Malcolm Gladwell and Adam Grant, two people that I really respect and admire for how they view the world and the work that they've done with the mind and psychology. And this is a really, really great book in understanding the mind, body, and the limits that we place on ourselves unknowingly and how to combat that. So here we go. We're diving in. I'm going to share some of the studies that I found in chapter 4 of the book that I think we can extract from the physical space and put into life as a whole. And so if this interests you at all, I highly suggest getting the book. It's a great read, and it's just fascinating to know just how simple environmental factors and also mental factors can affect how we show up to the spaces that we occupy. You know, these aren't earth-shattering ideas, but they do reinforce and remind us that we don't have to overcomplicate things, right? To simplify and to put simple fundamentals to use every day so that they compound and we just equip ourselves with the tools to handle adversity, uncertainty, pain, whatever life throws our way, right? This podcast is really about interviewing people who are living life on their terms, who are trailblazing, who have the courage to say yes to their life, yes to their dreams, to listen into the voice that only is for them, that's inside, that tells them to speak their truth and hold a standard, to say yes to a relationship or to say no and move forward, right? That's not easy work, but it's work that needs to be done, in my opinion. And the more we can tune into that, I think the more we can live on our terms, the more fulfilling life can be, the more purpose we can, deepen and use. And that's something I feel like is missing from the world in a lot of ways. So I'm going to go to chapter 4 called The Conscious Quitter. And I want to pick up with this guy named Samuel Marcoa, who was talking about the mental fatigue and how mental fatigue correlated with physical fatigue. And so in 2011, he was giving a talk at Charles Sturt University. They were talking about the future of fatigue, and he was giving a talk. And in his talk, he referenced a few of the studies that he was doing on mental fatigue. And in one of the studies that he was talking about, he had asked 16 volunteers to complete a pair of time to exhaustion tests on a stationary bike. And before one of the tests, the subject spent 90 minutes performing a mentally fatiguing computer task that involved watching a series of letters flash on a screen and clicking different buttons as quickly as possible depending on which letters appeared. I'm reading from the book. It's not a particularly difficult task, but it requires sustained focus. And doing it for 90 minutes is definitely draining. Before the other cycling test, the subject spent the same 90 minutes watching a pair of bland documentaries, World-Class Trains, and the Venice Simple and Orient Express, and the History of Ferrari. Specifically chosen to be emotionally neutral. Depending on how you look at it, the results were either utterly predictable or, from the perspective of a textbook physiology, inexplicable. After the mentally draining computer game, the subjects gave up 15.1% sooner in the cycling test, stopping on average at 10 minutes and 40 seconds, compared to 12 minutes and 34 seconds. It wasn't because of any detectable physiological fatigue, heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen consumption, lactate levels, and a host of other metabolic measurements. Those were identical during both trials. Motivation levels, as measured by psychological questionnaires immediately before the cycling test, were the same, and helped along by a 50 euro prize for the top performance. The only difference was that right from the very first pedal stroke, the mentally fatigued subjects reported higher levels of perceived exertion. When their brains were tired, pedaling a bike simply felt harder. This idea of perceived exertion, right? That was the only thing that matters, according to Marcoa. If the effort feels easy, you can go faster. If it feels too hard, you'll stop. Okay, so before I go any further in what he is about to go deeper on, what I am getting from this is, one, how you perceive the work that you do. If you show up to a job that you absolutely hate and it's just before you even walk in the doors, you're psychologically checked out, exhausted, and just do not want to go, then that's going to be pulling teeth to get you to reach any sort of high level performance, right? Depending on how you view a situation, the meaning that you're assigning, the story that you're creating, whether real or not, is affecting how you show up as a whole, not just to an exercise, but to your job, to your marriage, to your kids, to anything that you're a part of, right? This idea of the mental story affects you at a cellular level, right? You're just not able to last as long. So one thing that could be done there is to find one thing that you could focus on that is beneficial. And that might be that you're doing this quote unquote terrible job to save the money to do X, Y, and Z. And that's enough to shift the meaning of doing the terrible work, knowing that it's not forever, so that you show up with a different level of energy, you're able to last longer, you're able to think different, and you're still able to relatively perform well based on that mental narrative and that mental meaning, right? So, or a practice, what is in the thing that you're about to do that is benefiting you? And the easy kind of thing that you could go to is like, well, nothing's benefiting me. Well, if there were one thing, what would that be? And finding that one thing can make that terrible thing be more bearable. And if it's more bearable, then skill can be developed under those quote unquote unbearable environmental factors, causing you to get more wisdom, sharpen more skill, or transition the environment into something that you would have not thought of if you didn't have the meaning towards what you're doing. And so Marcoa goes on to say, getting mentally fatigued increases your sense of effort, right? We're not always willing to push to an effort of 20, which is one reason athletes rarely produce world records or even personal bests in training. So then Marcoa shares a classic illustration of what he's talking about, referencing an experiment that was done in 1986 by French researcher Michael Cabanek. Hope I'm saying that right. Cabanek asked volunteers to sit bent-legged, so basically a wall squat, with no chair for as long as they could, offering varying awards for each 20-second period they stayed in position. When the subjects were offered 0.2 francs for 20 seconds, their quads gave out after over just about 2 minutes on average. When they were offered 7.8 francs per 20 seconds, their endurance magically doubled. If the moment of collapse was dictated by a failure of the muscles, how did the muscles know about the richer payoff? The mental story that was going on. If I last longer, I'll get paid more. Mental story. Both before and during the exercise. Even when the pain was there in their legs, burning their thighs, why are they doing it? What's the purpose? Why are we here? Well, simply put, the purpose here was to get more money. So whatever your reason for doing the thing that you're doing, finding a deeper purpose for why you're doing it is ultimately going to allow you to last longer. The longer you last, ideally, the better you get, the more awareness you have, the more your confidence could potentially grow because there's more time under tension. There's more time in the thing that you're hopefully wanting to get better at. And so Marcoa himself produced a similar mind over muscle demonstration with a group of elite rugby players who competed in a time to exhaustion cycling test. At an average target power of 242 watts, which corresponded to 80% of their peak power, the players lasted for about 10 minutes, with cash prizes to ensure they fully exhausted themselves. As soon as they gave up, within 3 or 4 seconds, they were asked to see how much power they could generate in a single 5-second burst of pedaling. Curiously, although they had just declared themselves incapable of producing 242 watts, they managed to average 731 watts during this 5-second sprint. It follows that the subjects didn't stop the test because their muscles were physically incapable of producing the required power. Instead, the researchers argued it was the perception of effort that mattered. This is also bringing up an idea of how can you make hard work fun? By doing it in a different location. Maybe I work with a lot of athletes, and one of the type of athlete that I work with is dancers. Oftentimes, dance practices will take place in a gym. Doing practice outside can be a small little shift that changes the whole dynamic of the practice, that infuses novelty, newness, into a practice that changes the dimension of that practice. There's more engagement, you have the sunlight, you have the weather elements, and it makes the practice more engaging. And when it's more engaging, there's more opportunities for flow. There's more opportunities to learn quicker because more of the person is in the experience, right? For the classroom setting, one of my mentors, Dr. Mark Guadagnoli, would regularly teach in different areas of the room. He would teach from the front. He would teach on top of desks. He would teach from the back, from the side. This was to create a level of novelty to make it sticky, to make it memorable, so that he would engage us more. And the more we were engaged, the more we remembered the information. The more we remember information, the faster we learn. The more we learn, the better we can be, right? So whether you're listening to this from a leadership lens and how to facilitate more engagement from your team or remove some limiting beliefs that your team has around whatever goal you have for them, or you're just listening to this for your own performance. Maybe you're training for something physically hard that you're like, oh, I don't know if I can do it. Or you're preparing for a really big speech that this is the first time you've ever done that, or the first time your company has ever innovated in this way. Like whatever the thing is, know that your story around it is going to be one of the main contributors to how well that experience is going to go. And these are just examples. What I'm reading you are just examples of how we can leverage this information for our benefit rather than for our destruction. Let me continue to read here. Marcora argued, is that anything that moves the effort dial in your head up or down affects how far or fast you can run. All the usual physical cues like dehydration, tired muscles, pounding heart, all that stuff, athletes train their bodies to adapt to these cues, and over time, the effort of running at a given pace gets lower. But less obvious factors like mental fatigue also contribute to how hard your run feels. And trying to hold a marathon pace for hours and hours, for example, is pretty taxing on the brain. This, Marcoa told the conference, leads to a radical idea. If you could train the brain to become more accustomed to mental fatigue, then just like the body, it would adapt and the task of staying on pace would feel easier. So this is what he goes on to say is called brain endurance training. By introducing psychologically challenging tasks before training to broaden the capacity for your brain to handle fatigue, ultimately giving you an advantage in training that then when translates to whatever you're training for, in this case, a race or a tournament or, whatever the key game moment is, and that's all that you're doing, it's going to be much easier when your training is way harder. I'm thinking about when I was in high school, I played football and I was a quarterback, and we'd have practices after school, but then I would go home. I would do early morning trainings and then late night trainings. And some of the trainings that I would do is I would push cars. Like I pushed my dad's truck probably for like 600 yards up and down this big street that we lived on. And I would push it for 20 yards and then rest for 10, push it for 20, rest for 10, push it for 20, rest for 10. And whether it was doing anything for my physical strength, what it was doing, it was making me physically or mentally stronger. Because one, no one I knew ever had done that, maybe except for my dad, because that's where he got the idea. And so psychologically, I felt like I was improving and doing different things. I was putting that energy into being better and into standing out and doing what more people wouldn't do. I would run mountains, like up to the peaks of mountains, and then I'd run down the mountain as fast as I can, looking at the rocks. Very similar to how a mountain bike person goes downhill on a mountain was how I was going, but just running. And so you have to be quick with your feet. If you land on the wrong rock at the wrong time, you could twist an ankle, you could fall. I definitely fell lots of times, but you kind of get into this flow like situation with it. And so I loved doing that. I would run up hills and like do sprints up and down. I'd do push-ups on these stairs. I would do different things that challenge my body that were probably really good for my, fast twitch muscle fibers and just overall stamina and strength of my body, but more importantly, the mental aspect. I was training my mind to handle hard things outside of what was required. What was required from me from the team was to be at practice. What wasn't required was everything that I did outside of practice, right? And that was the advantage. So I made practice harder and longer so that when the game came, it was easy. I shifted and was doing this brain endurance training without really understanding it until kind of now, talking about it and referencing it to what I'm learning here, right? So there was another experiment that he said that was in relation to our self-talk and how that influences how long we last, which again is the mental story, the mental meaning. What are we saying to ourselves when we're in hard things? What are we saying to ourselves before we even get into hard things? One of the, just remembered this, one of the biggest power lifters, or Ronnie Coleman, I think he's a bodybuilder or a power lifter, I have to confirm, but he would be squatting or like on this leg press machine. I think it's over 1,000 pounds, really a lot of weight, right? And before he would do it, he would say lightweight. He'd be lightweight, 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 lightweight. And he would shout it like several times. And then he'd take the weight off and he'd push it and it'd go up. And as he's going up, he's saying it. And it was his way of decreasing the perceived effort. He knew it was going to take effort, but decreasing the perceived effort by calling it light, even though it was heavy, right? These are little psychological tricks that can influence what we do when it matters. And so this experiment was about a cycling test. So Marcoa goes on to say that he created a study that they had 24 volunteers complete a cycling test to exhaustion. They gave half of them some simple guidance on how to use positive self-talk before another cycling test 2 weeks later. The self-talk group learned to use certain phrases early on, like feeling good, and others later in the race or the workout that said, let's go, push through this, and practice using the phrases during training to fatigue, at which ones felt more comfortable and effective. Sure enough, in the second cycling test, the self-talk group lasted 18% longer than the control group, and their rating of perceived exertion climbed more slowly throughout the test. Just like a smile or a frown, the words in your head have the power to influence the very feelings they're supposed to reflect. What is going on in your mind? It doesn't necessarily have to be you're amazing, you're going to do the best, you are the best. Like, it can be something as simple as keep going, or you got this, or you're better because of this. Whatever phrase you feel has a connection to you, that is a very effective tool to use in training, in a hard conversation, in anything challenging, right? So the whole point here is really to understand that the limitations we think we have are really just ideas that we've created from references in our past, whether it was someone else who tried and couldn't do it, or whether it's something that we tried and didn't do. We're referencing that, and we create a narrative around what's possible. And it isn't until we test it, we challenge it continuously, that we're able to break through and reach a new level of living, a new level of performance, a new level of our own identity. Things that are locked away or hidden from us because we're not looking for them, or we're not creating opportunities for them to emerge. It's in the pressure that these elements can come alive. It's in the pressure where your genius can be activated. If we're not challenging ourselves, if we're not putting our minds, our hearts, and our bodies in physically demanding environments regularly, then we are not staying sharp, and that can lead to complacency, and complacency leads to regret, and regret is one of the worst things that you can live with. So if this was helpful for you, if you learned a lot with this, I know I loved this book, and there's countless other experiments that they're referencing throughout the pages of the book. Highly suggest getting it, just for your own curiosity. But take what we've talked about here today, the purpose of why you're doing it, creating new environments in which you're doing hard things, understanding the meaning and the story you're creating around hard things, and how powerful your mind is in what you do, which is why I love the mind. Now, the mind is a messy, messy place. And there are moments where too much mind can actually be counterproductive. But what we're talking here is about more intention and the simplicity of giving yourself what it needs when it needs it. And this is a practice, an ever-evolving practice. So thank you for being here. I appreciate you. Share this episode with whoever you feel needs to hear it or could use a refresher or a reminder. And again, thank you for being here. Until next time, go out there, be your own 1%, be intentional, be you, and go make some magic happen.